Harriet Tubman dreamed of escape from the shackles that bound her to slavery. She dreamed this dream for others. Tubman forged these dreams into reality, and this reality became her legacy. A legacy of courage and hope, of fighting for beliefs, and for never giving up. To be a slave, to have no rights, to own nothing, and to be nothing more than owned. A property to be abused, property to be worked, a property to be sold. This is how almost 4 million people lived in the United States before the Civil War. Although many slaves had attempted and had made it to freedom, none had more of an impact or left behind a greater legacy than Harriet Tubman. Harriet was born sometime in February 1822 in Dorchester County, Maryland. She grew up, quote, neglected like a weed, unquote, and was beaten regularly. When Harriet was about 11 or 12, she was hit in the head and severely injured by a 2-pound weight that had been thrown by an overseer. This wound would lead to seizures and headaches that would trouble and guide Tubman for the rest of her life. The injury also led to dreams and dreamlike silences, which she believed were spiritual directions. Tubman said, quote, "The Lord who told me to take care of my people meant me to do it as long as I live," unquote. The year 1849 was the year which would change the course of Harriet's life, the lives of other slaves, and the course of history. This was the year Tubman's owner, Edward Brodess, died. Brodess was deeply in debt. Everything he owned, including his slaves, needed to be sold to pay these debts off. This would almost certainly lead to the sale of Harriet's family. The fear of being separated from her family and the fear of being sold was the catalyst that sent her fleeing north. Harriet Tubman's first journey was a 100-mile trek through Maryland and possibly Delaware. It was also on this journey she came into contact with the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad had established itself in Maryland through a network of abolitionists who believed it was their moral duty to help the enslaved escape. With their help along the way, Tubman made it to Philadelphia. She was free, but this was not enough. She was determined to help the rest of her family and friends escape. Escape was difficult enough, but the Fugitive Slave Act, passed in 1850, made the journey longer, the stakes higher. The Fugitive Slave Act made it illegal for anyone to aid in the escape of a slave. Those assisting a runaway could receive jail time and a $1,000 fine. Runaways who were caught, even in the northern states, would be returned to the South as a slave, no matter how long they had been free.
The Fugitive Slave Act definitely made it much more dangerous to run away using the Underground Railroad network. Harriet Tubman, of course, tapped into a network that was already working when she ran away. And she developed her own network and contacts over the years during the 1850s. But because of the Fugitive Slave Act, it made it financially lucrative for people to turn in runaway slaves. So it became very, very difficult, not only in the South, which it had always been difficult to run away, but in the North too, which generally had been a much safer place to be. But after 1850, the laws changed and required that even average citizens capture runaway slaves and turn them in. And judges were forced to try the cases, and they were paid $10 to find them guilty and $5 to set them free. So there was incentive to find everyone guilty. So it made it very, very difficult to feel secure in the North, and it made it dangerous for Underground Railroad agents to continue their activities. However, it did sort of have a backlash factor, that so many people were enraged by the Fugitive Slave Act that they became more active in the Underground Railroad and abolition movement. So in a way, it created a bigger network of Underground Railroad paths, which was necessary.
A new industry of bounty hunters in the free northern states left the fugitives no choice but to travel to Canada. The rift between the South and the North over the issue of slavery was widening, and it ultimately led to the Civil War. Tubman's determined nature and her belief in divine guidance led her back at least 10 times before the first shots were fired on Fort Sumter. Although the Civil War curbed Harriet's Underground Railroad missions, they did not stop her from helping her people in the South. During the Civil War, Harriet was employed by the U.S. Union government as a spy. It was during this time she led a group of Union soldiers on a raid into enemy territory. The command was given to her by Colonel Montgomery, commander of the 2nd South Carolina Volunteers, a black regiment fighting for the Union. No Union lives were lost during this raid, and approximately 800 slaves were freed. The Emancipation Proclamation had already been in effect for 6 months at the time of this raid, but it was not enough for Harriet. This proclamation only freed the slaves who were held in the southern states. The law had no effect on the escaped slaves living in the North. Harriet told President Lincoln it was not enough. Slavery had to be killed. During and after the Civil War, Harriet gave speeches about her time as a slave. The retelling of indignities she suffered, as well as her daring escapades, made for captivating speeches. What little money she made, she used to help others. One dream she fulfilled was to build a house for the elderly black people who could no longer take care of themselves. She never turned anyone away. She also became involved in the suffrage movement and campaigned vigorously. The dreams Harriet Tubman followed and believed in led her to become one of the most famous American women in history.
I think there are several important parts of her legacy. One of them is that she represents to us, I think, the ability of one person to change the course of history, one person to make positive changes in other people's lives. Here was a woman who was born in the most difficult of circumstances, a young enslaved child, and she grew up often separated from her family. She had a tremendous disability, and yet she was able to take control of her life out of the hands of other people and take her own liberty and then go back and free other people. And she came to represent freedom and equality and justice and self-determination for not only the people that knew her, but once people became aware of her actions, they were inspired by her. And even today, people are inspired by her courage and the things that she did.
She left us with the lasting legacy of freedom. For the people she led to freedom, for a nation built on and divided by the institution of slavery, for those she inspires today. Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Harriet Tubman's lasting legacy? To never give up on your dreams.